growth? Do we not want export-led growth? What alternatives are there to export-led growth? In the studies I've done, let me put it very bluntly, all sustained exports, all sustained growth are export-led. There is no such thing as non-export-led growth, in the sense that, on average, when a country grows at 1, exports grow at 1.4. Sustained growth, you have exports growing faster than GDP. So all exports is always, all growth is always export-led. Sustained growth is always export-led, and not just export-led, it's export-led in a transformation of your export package towards greater diversity and towards more complexity in the things you export. In the study I've done, essentially, 40% of countries narrowed their income gap. Only 20% of countries narrowed the gap significantly. Morocco narrowed the gap. It was 10% of US GDP in 1990. It's now 13% of US GDP. Still, the gap is huge, right? But sort of narrowing. It's in the second quintile of growth experiences in this period, Morocco, okay? Those countries transformed their export basket. They diversified towards more complex products. That is central to a growth strategy. But diversification is full of market failures because it faces a bunch of chicken and egg problems. If you're going to diversify, it means that we're going to start making things you were not making before. But to make things, you have to know how to make them. But you typically don't know how to make the things you don't do. So how do you start making the things you don't do if to make them, you have to know how to make them, but you don't know how to make the things you don't do? You need watches, you need watchmakers to make watches, but why are you going to have watchmakers in a country that doesn't make watches? And how do you become a watchmaker if the country is not making watches? So how do you diversify? These things markets are not good at, and just freeing markets is not going to be enough. You will have to have something that I noticed was not mentioned, I would say, at all in the book, and that is that you need industrial policies. You need sector policies. It was even in the video. It was even in the video that you need tourism policy, you need agricultural policy, you need, you need aerospace policy, you need policies to, you need séparer, these bets to facilitate the transformation process. And that's why we see in the Moroccan export basket the growth of tourism in new areas, in new destinations, the whole industrial structure that developed around Tanger Med. You see the movement towards new things. For example, right now, the world is sending the message that there is global warming, climate change, and that every country should focus on how they're going to lower their own emissions, right? That's a conversation, and we will help you lower your own emissions. But if you are in a country like Morocco that has so much sun and so much wind, why should the focus be on helping Morocco lower its emissions? The ambition is, what can Morocco do to help the world lower its emissions? The world is currently emitting a lot because the world is using ammonia as fertilizer, and that ammonia is gray and emits a lot of CO2. So if the world is going to lower its emissions, the world is going to need green ammonia, and OCP is going to provide them with a green ammonia so that the world lowers its emissions, not Morocco. If Morocco stops its emissions, the world is not going to notice. But the world is going to notice if Morocco helps them mobilizing its sun and wind resources to help the world lower its emissions. And that, by the way, let me say, is also, I mentioned industrial policy, which is a 4-letter word. OCP is a state-owned enterprise, which is also kind of like a 4-letter word. If you take an IMF report, it will say, if you search for state-owned enterprise, very, very near, you'll find the word privatization. right? Because it's sort of like, state-owned, private, no. State-owned enterprises can play a strategic role in diversification, and I think that it has played that role in Morocco, and I want to rescue that experience from Morocco to the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ricardo, I have many questions to you, but two observations. The question of industrial policy is something that we are internally reflecting on, seriously, but we are reflecting on it. We're a bit worried that is an issue that could be considered or used as a way to develop policies that will limit trade and be a bit on the protectionism than more on designing the future. My second observation, you are sitting near someone who come from a country where industrial policy destroyed growth in the past. It's very interesting to see what you're saying, and this brings me to my second round of questions, is how you make it happen. And this is an issue where it's not only for good economists or strategists, it's also for those who are going to implement. And this is where we hit the wall of political economy. This is where the big issues, you need to address a situation where you have winners and losers. How you do this? You hit a situation where you have majorities that could be, in fact, losing elections because of those transformative reforms. Again, let me go back to you. How you did in Poland survive 3 decades of reforms without facing those kind of issues? Or maybe you have faced them, but what are the lessons that you have learned from this experience?
Okay, of course, it's not that during the transformation and during the reforms there was a stable political situation. The governments changed many times because, as I said, it is that you need to take sometimes very difficult decisions. Sometimes there is a cost, a political cost, but the main issue was that we saw the ultimate goal, and the ultimate goal was to catch up the West, to become a European Union member, and we had a framework, a very strong framework for the reforms, which was given by the European Commission for the states which were in the accession process and which need to come through transformation, to introduce very strong, very efficient institutional reforms, to fight the corruption, to introduce transparent measures in the administration, to build a culture which was the culture accepted by the European Union and the culture which gave the businesses a very very transparent business environment to grow with their business activities, and so this EU reform, the EU reform anchor, this was really a strong incentive for Poland. Of course, it didn't mean that all the people all the time they were very happy because we were going towards the European Union. At the beginning of the reforms, we had a very deep market reform and also very deep reforms because of the hyperinflation. And we could do more about the vulnerable people in this time, because we a bit and the governments they sacrificed them on the way, and this was the role for the next governments to think about the social programs, to think about those most affected, and about the inclusive growth, to make the growth really inclusive. But the deep market reforms, they had a very important impact on the businesses and on their activities, because we entered a single market, and EU and the single market gives a lot of opportunities. That's one thing. And the free competition, the open market, this allowed for the Polish companies to build really strong businesses. And nowadays, we can see the examples of the businesses which started in the 90s, in the early 2000s, which are now the biggest world's exporters, like furniture, like doors and PVC windows, like the very famous games, The Witcher and Cyberpunk. These are the Polish products and the benchmark, let's say, for Poland. We are also one of the leaders in the spare parts for automotive sector, for the lithium batteries, the first one in Europe. And because we have managed to build a very friendly business environment with a lot of tax incentives supporting the investments, we are also a very attractive country for foreign investors. The FDI the amounts grows every year from like 5% year to year. So Poland has become a hub also for the hubs, a place for the hubs, like for R&D, for innovation, for services in fintech, in ICT. And this is due to the reforms we have carried for those 3 decades, because these were the investments in the infrastructure, in the human development, so the education, the quantity and quality of education was very important. And now we can harvest, let's say, because we have a very, very skilled labor force in Poland. And also in the recent years, the focus on digitalization, on the innovation and support also of the government for those processes. But I think that the big challenge nowadays is the accessibility of the capital, and it is the challenge for the whole Europe. So there is something to be done there, and this is very important also to have strong institutions. I said already about the democracy, open markets, everything, but also the government. The government needs to build a trust with the traders, with the entrepreneurs, but also with citizens. And when you introduce new reforms, you really need to seek for a broader support for the reform and to define the goal clearly and to explain and try to build a coalition around the idea. This is really, a dialogue is very important, but also to create a good environment. And in Poland, it is also, when we are talking about the inclusive growth, about the most vulnerables, you need to have also social policies. Of course, the sound finances are really a key here to afford to realize your goals and also not to lose the social part. And what we did in Poland was a very successful reform of the tax system. It was the organizational reform, legal reform, but also digitalization, which helped a lot with the ceiling of tax system, but also increasing compliance. And we have doubled or more than doubled our tax incomes in the course of the last seven years. So this is really what is important, to have a clearly defined goal, to be decisive. Of course, it will cost sometimes. A political cost will be there, but you need a mature politicians, but you also need a mature society, and this could be done by education, by the democratic processes, which will help and the strong anchors for your reforms.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. Let me now also thank you very much. When thinking about sequencing and implementation, turn to you, Minister. You have identified an important set of reforms. You have delivered in the past, as Ricardo mentioned, the delivery on les paris de l'avenir 15 years ago. Where do you see the sequencing of all these important reforms? This is my first question. And my second related questions, do you see gaps? Have you identified certain number of gaps, especially on the enablers, access to finance, access to talent, access to market? And what have you learned from your experience and experience of others in order to engage in a journey like this? And what is the ideal sequencing of all these reforms?
Je voudrais revenir.
I would like to achieve our ambitions if we tackle the subjects in a sequential way. Our conviction was also that some reforms had necessarily more impact. Some reforms were mature to be launched immediately.